Welcome to the Money to the Masses podcast, putting you in control of your finances. One mic, two idiots, and, according to our latest figures, 3 listeners. Here are your hosts, Damien Fay and Andy Leaks.
Before we start, Andy, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsors, Money Farm. Now, Money Farm are the largest digital wealth manager in Europe, and they create portfolios of ETFs for their clients. They're incredibly cheap and ideal for somebody who's wanting to get into investing, and perhaps for more experienced investors who don't actually want to run their own money anymore. Now, they will even offer to run the first £20,000 of any of our listeners' portfolio absolutely free if they enter the code MTTM20K into the website at moneyfarm.com. For more information, check out their website. But for now, Andy, let's get back on with the show.
Hello and welcome to episode 130 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Andy. I mean, I'm in such a buoyant mood, actually, today. I'm in an incredibly positive outlook, because I had a day off yesterday. So I've just launched into what I've been up to. But I had a day off. I had a day off, and I rediscovered the inner child, because basically there's been a lot of elections going on, haven't there, around the country for local councils. And cut a long story short, my daughter's school was closed, as it's usually a polling station, and so we decided to go to Chessington World of Adventure. So we went to an amusement park for the day, and it was brilliant. And yeah, you never get to take your children out of school, and we went there and there was hardly anybody there, and we walked on every ride, and it was just great fun. So yeah, it's almost been inspired me for this podcast, because I've taken more of a there's going to be no investing this week, so some of you may cheer, but many of you may go, oh, but there's no investing. We're going to be doing more about enjoying ourselves and spending money. So it's inspired the podcast. But it was a brilliant day out.
Good. Funnily enough, I was thinking of doing something very similar. I think we're going to go to Lego World or something soon. But unfortunately, we're going to have to do it at the weekend, because we couldn't take advantage of the polling day. Like unfortunately, our local village hall does the polling station in our area. So the children have to go to school.
Yeah, see, if you live in London, there's so many people, they have to shut half the schools. But if you do go, I have to say, I'm not a deal finder. I'm not a voucher code man. And I'll come on to this later. Actually, today's podcast, there are going to be songs sung around campfires about it, because it's probably the best, most fluid podcast we've ever going to do it. Nearly everything has got some sort of interlink between the next piece. But talking about vouchers is the first thing. And we got there, and we had all 4 of us in our family get into Chessington for, I think it was £42, which is a brilliant deal. So it was by planning ahead. They obviously do those 2-for-1 things on Kellogg's boxes. My wife sorted it all, and I'm no good at looking for deals. And at that price, you can't knock it. I mean, bearing in mind, if you were an adult on your own, you were going to be paying that almost, if you just rocked up at the door, you'd be paying that for yourself. I think they're expensive for what they are, but it was a brilliant day out. So yeah, I had a great time. And we probably one of the funniest things, I'll quickly mention it before we move on, was we actually invited the grandparents. So my dad, who you know, Andy, actually was there, and was obviously again discovering his inner child. And one of the highlights of my day will always be the moment when he was inside one of those. It's like a huge, almost cage-like entity with different floors, and the children, there's a height limit in terms of trying to keep adults off this thing, and it's meant to be for children running around with these guns that fire foam balls at each other. And bearing in mind he's just about to turn 68, he was in there, and I just have a vision of him standing there like an American wrestler with his arms held out wide, almost screaming, "Come on!" to the amassed children. I don't think it would be an image that will stay with me forever, because I'm not even sure that people in Chessington had ever seen a grandparent do that in there. So yeah, brilliant.
Fantastic stuff. Did you do the vampire ride? I remember going on the vampire ride.
I didn't, but my 7-year-old daughter did, which I was amazed at. No, I didn't do that. I had to watch the youngest, who is obviously too young to go on the ride. So my wife went on there, and no, I've done it before. I do like a roller coaster, but my 7-year-old impressed me immensely by wanting to go on everything that she could, and so I had to do the usual. Yeah, no problem. And you go on there, and you're sort of secretly crying inwardly as the roller coaster sort of chugs up that ramp, and you put on a brave face, because that's what us dads do, don't we, Andy?
We do. I went to Disneyland Paris last year, and we had the Exactly the same thing, going on all the rides and having to be dragged on by the little ones. And you have to sort of plan ahead because some children can't go on some rides, so you have to sort of wait at the end. But a lot of these theme parks these days, here's a tip for you. If you ask, they'll actually allow you to wait at the end of the ride and then do like a little tag team. So long as you've queued up once, they'll allow you to go back on again with the other parent so that the parent doesn't lose out because of the younger sibling.
Really?
Have you heard that before?
No,
Yeah.
that is fantastic.
Yeah, Disneyland Paris accept the fact that some younger children, say under 4s, under 5s, are far too young for the slightly bigger rides, but the older children want to go on it. And what tends to happen is one parent has to stay with one and one has to go with the other. But they accept the fact that the other parent might miss out and actually they might want to go on.
I love that.
So long as you've queued up.
Yeah, that. Sorry to cut across you, Andy, but that is the kind of thing where is thinking more about families, and I like that. I think it should be more of that. People who don't have children will probably be swearing at their radio and going, "I'm cute. Why should I? Blasted kids!" But then I'd argue they probably shouldn't be in Disneyland anyway.
Yeah, I think you get a little wristband or a token that they give you, so that when you get to when you cut the queue, people don't look at you funny, and the people that work for Disneyland can see that you've already queued once. See, it's quite a good system. Anyway, we've talked far too much about that. We're talking about. Are we going to go straight on to coupons and money?
Well, we're going to actually. So this is the first link that will from that first bit talking about vouchers and deals, and I am the world's worst at looking for these things. Do you know why? Because I hate doing it. I hate going and looking for a voucher code because, I mean, I'm not the most prolific online shopper and I don't particularly enjoy it. I don't sit there and think, I'm going to browse around the internet, see what I could buy. I know lots of people do. My wife, she loves it. But the thing is that I know when I want to buy something, and so I decide, and then you get to that point and they say, have you got a code when you're on the checkout page? And you think, well, I haven't. They must be out there. So you go on those sites and start looking around and trying to find a code. And what happens, you end up on those sites like, I don't mind naming them, but vouchercodes.co.uk or whatever it is. And you go on there and they're very clever because when you Google, they appear in the search results for the site you want and a code. And then when you go in there, they say you've got to put in your email or whatever it is and to access the code. And almost inevitably, the code has expired. And it just drives me insane. I just feel like the world or the internet is awash with expired codes or non-existent codes. So things like free delivery. I mean, most sites will give you free delivery anyway. So as somebody who hates doing that, I wouldn't mind actually benefiting from them from once in a while. And this week I saw something called Pouch, which was right up my street. And it is a browser add-on that you download. If you go to joinpouch.com, so join POUCH.com, and you can download the add-on, and what it does, it sits in your browser. It works for Chrome or Firefox. So at the top, just next to where the address bar is, when you surf the internet and you go on a website that's a shop and you start to surf around, it will ping up a little number to tell you if there are any voucher codes in existence for the website that you're on, and you just click on the button and it just displays what they are, so you can see the deals or whatever, 20% off of it, whatever the products are. And then if you want it, you can then just click and it just reveals the code, and then you can, and I think it even copies it into the checkout page, which I loved. And I went and had a go at this, and like I say, I'm not a prolific shopper, but I went around, and if you go on the big grocery shops, they have codes for those. If you go on some of the clothes shops, things like ASOS, they have codes on there. But for me, I am one of those people who is just so I don't like searching for codes. There are people who are far better at it than me, which is why we never talk about it on the podcast. But I love lazy ways to do anything, and so it's a lazy way of doing it. I don't really care that Pouch make money from the codes, just like voucher codes and all those people do, but I like the idea that it's very passive. And I mean, I did try it on numerous sites. They don't have it for every site. I mean, the only site I have used codes for is the well, here's a tip actually. My cat, okay, I talk about every now and then, is I took her to the vet because she constantly had a bad stomach. She's the cat or the feline equivalent of me, and the vet pretty much told me that she's got the equivalent of cat Crohn's. Now, as a man who suffers from Crohn's, I could only love her even more for having a feeling what she's going through. Anyway, basically prescribe or recommend you use this particular food that's easy for them to digest, but it costs a fortune. and they would sell it, but they quite happily, and I applaud them. Said, look, if you go online, you can get it cheaper, but it's not that cheap. And anyone who has pets in the cat food world, you're paying like £1 a sachet for this stuff, and they eat one every time. So that's an expensive cat. Bearing in mind, you could just buy biscuits or things for them and feed them on a tenner a month. I'll end up having to pay like £3 a day. Anyway, there's a website called medicanimal.com, which if you have a pet that needs any form of slightly like food that's more nutritionally beneficial, so that sort of special food, it is very cheap. It's the cheapest by far I've found. Nearly anywhere else you look online, those sorts of dietary foods don't vary much in price, but on there they do great deals on there, and they do lots of codes. So when I went on there, I was going to hopefully be euphoric for the next code that I could have on there to order the next stash of food. I mean, if you ever ordered £90 worth of cat food at any one time, I have, and it comes in a lorry. Actually, they're delivered. I think it's by Ocado, so I'm giving them a big plug here. But they have saved me sometimes half the money, and but they didn't have a code, so I'm disappointed on that front. But that Medic Animal do email codes, so I like the idea of pouch. I've not used it a lot. It seems to be for people who buy normal things rather than cat food for cats that won't stop going to the toilet. It's great. But the one thing I would say is that it won't work on things like iPads as far as I can tell, because it's a browser extension. So it works in a typical like Mac desktop, that's the word. So it's a great idea. It won't work in all occasions, but I just love anything that is passive and lazy.
Good. And what I love about that, Damien, is you were talking about a sort of a widget, a desktop add-on called Pouch, and then you went on to talk about buying pouches for your cat, and so there's a lovely little tie in there, food pouches.
Look, do you know what, Andy? I'm telling you, people are going to write songs around a campfire in years to come that children will talk about episode 130 of the Money to the Masses podcast, because there are these links that I'm not even meaning to make, and there you go.
Good. Okay, so what we got next?
Right, the second piece we've got is linking on the idea of trying to get a good deal, so discounts, and the idea of spending money. And you know, when you spend time with your family, you automatically think about holidays and things like that. And we've covered cheap flights before on the podcast, and we've gone along and we've done, if you go back and look, we talked about Google Flights, which is, I love, I think it's really clever. I used it recently, which is just like any other flight sort of comparison sites, you can actually find flights. But what I like about the Google version is that it's got this element of flexibility, where you can just say you don't really know where you want to go, you just know the times, and you can see on charts a sort of peak and troughs of pricing, and so therefore it can actually tell you if you move your dates by one day, this holiday will be loads cheaper, etc. And it does hotels as well, so it's very good from that point of view. It's good for people like me who have an idea but are not obsessive enough to do the research. But anyway, moving on from that, we once talked about going cheaply on private jets. So go and look at that podcast or listen to that podcast. But there was something I've never really come across before called error fares. And there was a recent piece I saw about error fares. So airline fares that have been put up and out there by mistake that are ridiculously cheap. And there are ways you can find them. And these fares come about by either human error or technical mistakes where they put the pricing, or it could be they miss a zero off a first class price on a ticket, or it could be the currency exchange. But ultimately you get a really cheap flight, but you can find them. And I was looking into it, and there were ways you can do it. And there are sites out there, they're not specifically meant to go and find what they call these error fares, but they can help you. So they're people who show great deals and cheap flights. So I mentioned Google Flights, they might come up on there, but there are others that are probably a bit more appropriate. There's I'll rattle through them. There's 4 actually: secretflying.com, flyforfree.com, flynouse.com, so flynous.com, cheapflightslab.com is the other one. And now these enable you to search for good deals on flights. So they will be cheap, but some of them may be cheap because they're meant to be, so they may not be the errors, but they do flag the errors on there, which I just love the idea. I mean, would you buy a cheap flight, Andy, if there was an error on it?
Yeah, absolutely I would. There's no reason why I wouldn't. The only thing that for me is I doubt there will be lots of these error fares all going together. So would it be difficult to get, say, 4 seats at that price as an error fare, or is it just a one-off?
Do you know what?
Because I can't fly on my own. I'm not a good flyer. I'd need at least one companion.
Are you like Mr. T? So you have to have somebody either hold your hand or knock you out.
Yeah.
But it's a good question. What will happen? It could be a particular flight is priced incorrectly. So I'll give you an example. There was one that was from LA to London that was a round trip, so there and back for £345, which is clearly mispriced. But you can get individual, could be possibly more than one. The one thing I would say though, and this comes down to your rights, what happened, you may not want to bank on the fact that the airline will honour it. Before I get onto that, I just want to tell people quickly another way that they can find these things. It's social media, and I did this, and then you can find these flights. Now, if you go onto Facebook or Twitter, people use hashtags for all sorts of reasons, mostly to hurl insults at each other, but they do use them apparently to find cheap flights. Now, there is a hashtag error fare, there is a hashtag mistakes fares, and hashtag airline glitch. Now, if you go on those, you can find people post them on there, and they will put the glitches. Now, it's kind of one of those things, if they go out there, then what happens is they usually get snapped up by people. So going back to your original question, you might struggle to get groups of tickets. But the other thing that's interesting is that most people have this belief that if something is priced incorrectly, that if you buy it, they have to honour it, and technically they don't. Now, an airline doesn't have to honour a misprice as long as a reasonable person would have realised that it was a mistake. So if you were going to get an airfare for £1 to New York, then a reasonable person knows they're not going to achieve that. So they could actually pull the deal. So what I would say is if people find these deals, then I wouldn't go banking on it necessarily coming through or booking holidays and everything around it, because it could be pulled. Now, that does mean that the most likely ones not to be pulled are the ones where the discounts aren't the biggest. So if you get greedy, then you're more likely that they could be pulled. But there have been quite a lot of cases where the airlines, even though there have been these huge pricing errors, haven't actually pulled them and have honoured them. And partly that was because of negative publicity on the likes of Facebook. So they've actually bowed down to pressure and honoured some of these deals. So I think it's a great idea. I like it. If you're flexible, you don't really mind about taking a little bit of a risk, then why not try it? You could do. I'd love to hear if anybody has ever done it, or if you do try it and what happens. But ultimately, you could end up with no flight, but then I suppose you could book another one. But then ultimately, one of the things, if you do book, then you should also book with your credit card, because then you get that consumer protection under Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act. So a nice idea, which I loved, and let me know if you try it.
Good, yeah. Do get in touch if you do try it and if you are successful, because we like to hear success stories. What is next?
Right, the last piece I'm going to do, I mean, that last story was featured in the national press, so it is something that is out there and is being done by people, so it's not just something I've made up for this podcast. But I'm linking on from this Section 75. See, look, another link that it could be another verse in this campfire song. But I'm talking about Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act. And previously we mentioned there could be issues with it. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, the Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act 1974 essentially gives you rights if you buy something using a credit card. And in very simple terms, it makes the credit card company jointly and severally, it's difficult for me to say, liable for any breach of the contract that you make with the person you're buying. So to put it quite simply, if you were to buy something and it didn't turn up, you didn't receive it, it was faulty, or it was not as described, then your credit card company is actually liable as well for that, and you can make a claim against them for the value of the thing that you've bought. Now, there is a slight rule in here that the value of the thing you have to buy has to be between £100 and £30,000. Okay, so you need to have made a payment towards that on your credit card. Now, the one thing that most people misquote or unintentionally mislead people is you don't have to have spent over £100 on your credit card. So to give you an example, if you bought a car and you use your credit card to pay for it, then if you spent £50 on your credit card towards that car that cost, say, £10,000, £15,000, and the car didn't turn up, the person went bust, or it wasn't as you wasn't as described or faulty, then you can actually make a claim for the full amount, so up to the £15,000 against your credit card company, which is a fantastic piece of protection that most people don't even realise. So I know that you'll get to some companies, they'll apply fees and things, maybe if you use credit cards or whatever, but you can just use a small portion. I've done it when booking things like holidays, or if you're doing things online to try and get a bit of protection. But this is where I'm now veering towards, because there is something that people need to be aware of. Now, the consumer credit, that protection you get, is actually works and is in place if you pay someone directly. The issue you have when you go online, and sometimes even if you're not online, if you're you go in somewhere and you pay via third-party application. So we're talking about the likes of PayPal, WorldPay, SagePay, iZettle and equivalents, then there is thought out there that breaks the chain between you and the seller, and as such that might invalidate your protection. And the reason this has come to light is previously there was some thought about this, particularly with PayPal. People were worried and questioned it, but it had never really come to the fore. We've not had many cases, but recently there's been a spate of cases that have been turned down and rejected by the credit card companies, citing this very fact. And one of them was to do with the iZettle, which is one of the payment mechanism some sites use. Now, if you go to the Financial Ombudsman, so FOS for short, now they're supposed to, if you complain, you're not happy with a complaint with a financial company, you can take it to them, and they're meant to sort of sit there as an ombudsman and actually deliver a verdict of sorts that everyone has to adhere to on a case to actually settle it fairly. Now, they're actually not offering any real guidance as to when this consumer protection applies and when it doesn't, which is causing a lot of confusion. So I can't sit here on this podcast, Andy, and say, if you use your credit card online via PayPal, you definitely won't be protected, or you definitely will. So the point is, people need to be aware that this is now coming to the fore, and actually we're getting more and more cases. So you would rather pay directly if you can to somebody. That's the first tip. The second tip is, if you want that consumer protection and you can only use the likes of PayPal, then still use it and use your credit card. But it may be that you will then have to appeal if for some reason things don't turn out how you want to, and you try and make a claim via the Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act. Then it gets rejected by the credit card company. Then you need to go to the Financial Ombudsman, and you might have to go down that route and sort of bang the drum a bit, because you may still ultimately get your money back. So it's really just sort of an FYI for people out there. If you're going out there and buying things and shopping online, as I'm talking about this week, that you may not actually be covered.
Okay, interesting. So we're just talking credit cards here. Does that sort of apply for debit cards as well?
No, good point. The Consumer Credit Act only applies to credit cards. Now, debit cards have something that's called chargeback. It's a chargeback scheme, which is slightly different. It doesn't work in the same way, and it's something that isn't actually enshrined in law, so it's part of a scheme as such that banks subscribe to. And the way that works is, if you have a similar scenario, you can ask your bank to try and get some of your money back, but it's not the same thing. So interestingly, that chargeback scheme isn't impacted if you pay via these third-party payment mechanisms like PayPal, WorldPay, etc. So that is actually okay, because it's the Consumer Credit Act. That's where the break happens. So it only applies to credit cards that people are now worried about what happens when you pay via third party. If you pay via debit cards, you didn't get the Consumer Credit Act protection anyway, but your chargeback scheme is still valid, so you could make a claim through that. Now, the interesting thing is PayPal, it came up before with PayPal, but PayPal do have their own buyer protection schemes. So I know PayPal is one of the biggest ones out there. So you can make a claim under that, which you might be able to get your money back if if something goes wrong. But apparently, and I didn't know this before I was looking into this today, and this is something that's complete news to me. If the seller or the person that you're buying the thing ultimately from has something called a commercial entity agreement with PayPal, then your consumer credit, the Section 75 of the Consumer Credit Act, is fine and is valid. So you could check if you really wanted to that the person you're purchasing from does have this commercial entity agreement in place, and in which case you would be okay. But the other things, the other third-party payment mechanisms, don't seem to have this equivalent.
Good stuff. Okay, what's next?
Well, given that we're talking about spending money, one thing just to point out to people that the old £5 note is no longer, by the time you've heard this, it is no longer legal tender. So you can't spend your old £5 notes in the shop. Shops don't have to accept them. If you have any, then you can obviously take them to your bank. But as of Friday, midnight on Friday, they cease to be legal tender. So if you've got some stashed away, I'm not lucky enough to be able to have any money that I've got stashed away. I mean, a £5 note is like a golden Willy Wonka ticket to me. I don't have a stash of them anywhere, so I know I don't need to check. But if you do, then you need to get them swapped over at the bank.
I'm sure some grandparents are still going to be sending those £5 notes in a card to their grandchildren for the next 2 or 3 years to come, bless them. But yeah.
But one of the side issues, I'm sure I heard that there is a slight negative of the old £5 disappearing for now, because I think the person on the back, the female on the back of that £5 note, was the last female, ignoring the Queen, that is on a note in the UK. So it's quite sad that I think we've actually now only got celebrating men on the back of our notes for the time being. I think it's a temporary setback. And so as a link to my last thing, I just want to quickly mention about inspirational people and money. We've got the One Giant Leap podcast this week, and it's a fantastic episode, which obviously, Andy, you've edited, so you've heard it already, and is out now. I speak to somebody who is only a prolific coupon queen, actually, that is her name, so going full circle back to the beginning, a coupon queen who's a legend at finding coupons, has over 300,000 followers on Facebook as a result, and built this all up from nothing, and is only at the moment, I think she's in her early 20s, I think she's 23 at the moment, has 4 businesses, even has a vlog and a YouTube channel based around her couponing and also based around beauty products. And it's an incredible story, and the reason she's on the One Giant Leap is that she has built that from scratch, and having 4 businesses at that age is inspirational. And more importantly, she's a young female, which I don't think we have enough airtime given to inspirational people, who not only is she an inspiration to anybody who wants to start a business and take their own one giant leap. She battled depression, a job she hated, and huge debts to be able to do this, and is now hugely successful, and even appears on This Morning TV programme with a regular slot on money saving. I mean, it's a great thing that she's done that. That's inspirational to people anyway, but to young girls, and as a dad, like you, Andy, of 2 young daughters, I think we need to have more people like that, more young female entrepreneurs, given more airtime, because there are some fantastic minds out there, and it's just as valid. I think we're too male-focused in a lot of what we do, and I don't want to add to that with the One Giant Leap podcast, so I don't, and I think it's a great interview, so please listen to it and give us your feedback. Absolutely, good stuff, Damien. So we're done. The usual stuff, I suppose. If you want to get in touch, please do so. It is at Money to the Masses with the number 2 if you want to get in touch with Damien on Twitter, or you can email us as always, podcast@moneytothemasses.com, or direct to Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Make sure you use Damien as in Damien. And of course, please do subscribe to the One Giant Leap podcast. It's a fantastic series coming to a close very soon. We're seeing the numbers absolutely going through the roof at the moment. It'll be lovely to have you guys come along for the journey too. Damien, that's the most I've spoken on this podcast. Back to you. I was conscious, Andy. I apologise. I just got into, I think it was the adrenaline of being on those rides yesterday. It's not even worn off yet. So I was going off at 100 mile an hour talking about money and spending and stuff like that. But
Damien, people tune in to listen to you, not me. So
well,
I know where my skills lie.
Not according to our latest review, which we spoke about, I think, last week. So we need somebody else to come along and give us another 5-star review, which balances it out slightly away from your favour. But there, anyway. So until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.